Hi, friends. Welcome to Season 2 of Bar of the Conference. I'm your host, Derek Scott III. Today's episode is with Kah-Jin Jeffrey Khan. Jeffrey is an elder in the California-Nevada Annual Conference. He's a first-generation Chinese-Malaysian American who has served at multiple levels of the UMC. He's currently the President-Emeritus and Professor of Hebrew Bible at Claremont School of Theology. Y'all, I walked away from this interview feeling truly edified by Jeffrey's story and perspective. He has wisdom that is the result of deep theological reflection over many years. And this wisdom is informed by his journey of coming to faith and experiencing his call outside the U.S., but also the impact of worshiping in predominantly white spaces within this country. Jeffrey's hope for the UMC is not blind to our need to be honest about our past, and it assumes that we must be realistic about the work ahead. This was a rich interview, but not a heavy one, and I think you'll be nourished by it. So go ahead, grab that notebook, that choice beverage, and let's listen to this really great interview with Jeffrey Kwan. Jeffrey Kwan, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing well, Derek.
I am excited to hear more of your story and to really get a sense of just how you became a United Methodist Christian, God's prevenient grace acting in your life, bringing you into our church. But I imagine for you, there's probably some steps before that might be interesting to hear as well. So you tell me where we're starting in the story of Jeffrey Kwan.
Thank you, Derek. I hope that you have a lot of time given to me just to tell my story.
I am here for it. That's exactly what we're doing. Yes.
I trace my Christian ancestry back to Malaysia. First and foremost, I'm a first generation Asian American. Came to the U.S. in 1984, January of 1984, to pursue graduate theological education. My Christian background actually begins with my maternal grandparents. A lot of my family members, their background is Chinese religiosity and Buddhism. But my grandfather and my grandmother became Christians probably in the 1940s. And in my own background, there is a very famous Chinese evangelist by the name of John Song, very brilliant intellectual, came to the United States to pursue a PhD in chemistry. And on his way back, he had a conversion experience. And so, as the legend goes, it was on the ship back to China. He threw away his diploma because of his conversion. He decided that he wanted to preach the gospel. Mm-hmm. And so he went home and started preaching the gospel. But he is from the same area that my family ancestry is from Putian. Mm-hmm. And that area in China was evangelized by the Methodists. The Methodists were there in the 1850s, in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And so John Song, because he was in the area, he became Methodist and also served a local church, preached in a local church. As he did his evangelistic work in many different parts in China and all over Asia. So he came in he went in the 1940s to Malaysia, and it was in one of his evangelistic meetings that my grandparents became Christian.
Wow.
And so my mother, as a young child, became a Christian together with the family. So when she married my father was not a Christian. My father came from a Chinese Buddhist, Chinese religiosity, Buddhist background.
Mm-hmm.
But the agreement between the two sides of the family is that my mother would not be forced to convert back to Chinese religiosity. She will be allowed to remain a Christian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my father was very supportive of my mother's faith. And from young, we were mandated, we were required to go to church, to go to Sunday school. There's no option. And my father would not allow us to skip church, even though he did not go to church until at a later part of his own life.
That sounds a lot like my upbringing, Jeffrey.
Yeah. And so I was born and raised a Methodist in Malaysia.
Wow.
And was very active in the church. I was a leader in the youth fellowship, and in my teens, I decided the church is a very evangelical church that I grew up with. So we will have retreats, we will have prayer, all-night prayer, and all that is involved in a very conservative evangelical church. So I received my call to ordain ministry when I was 16, 17 years old. And at 17, after high school, I went to Singapore to study theology. And 5 years of theological studies at the undergraduate level. I graduated, went back to Malaysia, served a local church as an associate pastor, and after 3.5 years, decided to come to the United States. My first experience in the United States was at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. And so we went to Highland Park, which is on the campus. So worship there for a period of time, but never really got to know people. It's a wealthy, big church. Ultimately, nobody knew us. We were there just for worship. And a wealthy white church. So it was very, very difficult to engage with the ministry there. In Atlanta, we went to a Methodist church for a period of time. And eventually, in the latter part of my life, my wife and I went to a Presbyterian church, a PCUSA church, for about 2 years. We actually became Presbyterians for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So I was not a Methodist for 2 years. And then the journey took me to Pacific School of Religion, where I started teaching. It was really in Berkeley that the Chinese Community Church in Oakland, when the pastor heard that I'm at PSR teaching, immediately came, met with me, and recruited me. So we got very active in the Chinese church, Chinese United Methodist Church, since 1991. And I was very active there. I served on committees. I taught Sunday school and preached. And there were a couple of years when the church was without an English pastor appointed to the church. I literally served as their pastor de jure.
Wow.
So, and there's a senior pastor, but I was functioning there in the English ministry with them.
Okay.
And it was when I was teaching as a United Methodist that I decided that I need to return to my ordination process. I had dropped my ordination process when I left Malaysia, and Bishop Melvin Talbot, who had just passed away, was very critical in my life as a United Methodist clergy. And he was the one that affirmed continued to affirm my call, especially my call to theological education. So my journey to United Methodism, there's so many steps that led the way to my identity as a United Methodist clergy today, and the privilege of serving the church in so many different ways.
Wow. Jeffrey, there's so many pieces that I kind of want to drop in on of all that you just shared. And I know we've got a lot more ground to cover, but talk to me about these predominantly white United Methodist churches that you and your family attended, but my sense is you weren't really invited in. Am I speaking too strongly here?
Not strongly, because in many ways that was our experience, particularly in Dallas as well as in Atlanta. And that was the reason why we ended up in Atlanta at a Presbyterian church.
Yeah.
In fact, in Dallas, we were in Dallas for 2.5 years. And eventually in Dallas, my family did not so much at the later point, because our daughter was very young. Did not we would just go to worship in the morning. But then I got to know a clergy person from Africa who had married a Malaysian Chinese and had a congregation, non-denominational congregation. I became more active with his church, which is multicultural. And every Sunday in the afternoon, I will go to his church. I would participate, and he would often invite me to lead the congregational prayer. And that's how I got quite active in his congregation. Whereas in the upper class white church, nobody, no pastor even make a pastoral call to us. It was strange for me as a clergy person who had been in ministry in Malaysia for 3.5 years. So in some ways, we were just worshiping and literally persona non grata. So, and that's the reason why when we, even in the context when we moved to Berkeley, we were very glad that we found our community. Very quickly found our community and landed in a community that embraces as a family. We were there for a long time until I left to go to Drew Theological School to be the dean, and so that's part of our involvement in the United Methodist Church.
It just breaks my heart to even hear.
Yeah.
And also, as a first generation Asian American, are there parts of ministry and church from home that you missed in that season, in some respects, because you weren't getting that, when you were worshiping in these predominantly white spaces?
Because I was a pastor and an associate pastor there for the 3.5 years before we left.
Mm-hmm.
There were all sorts of ministry I was involved in. I was the lead pastor of youth and young adult ministries. I was very involved in part of our Wesleyan tradition is cell groups. We had many groups working together, functioning in the church, which had about 1,000 members. So every week, I was very involved in the different ministries, and the ministry of care and visitation is part of the tradition. And in an advanced society, technological world, I think we have lost a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, because members are busy, and pastors are no longer in the habit of doing that. We miss a lot of those kinds of connection.
Yeah.
Human connection. So, for my years in Dallas and then in Atlanta, I don't believe any pastors ever made pastoral calls on us. So I think it is one of those things that we are missing in the tradition already.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about a ministry of care, do we always wait for folks to turn to the church to ask for care? Mm-hmm. Or how do we rethink how we need to do that kind of active caring ministry?
Yeah.
So
I'm curious, and we'll take a few steps down the journey, but you at some point, even with these experiences and even, serving in a non-denominational space, and I know that you connect with a community, a Chinese Methodist community in Berkeley, but what caused you to choose, or what was the catalyst for choosing the United Methodist Church, which I know there's also this sense of being called into the United Methodist Church. And so I hear that. But what was it that said, the United Methodist Church is a space that I need to serve, even recognizing that we're not really all that we could be.
Well, in many ways, it was about the community,
Mm-hmm.
and we ended up with a community that we could relate to, and form some very deep friendships. And even to this day, because I've been to different places, we are not in that congregation anymore. Some of the friendships are still there.
Yeah.
A lot of those friendships are still there.
Yeah.
And they are still very interested in what my daughters and my grandchildren are doing. And we have kept in touch with a good number of them.
Mm.
So for me, being a United Methodist, I am, in some ways, it's by default because of my Methodist roots.
Yeah.
As I've said, I could have chosen to remain a Presbyterian when I went to Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was invited into a community, into active participation in the life of a United Methodist congregation, we decided that it was a place that we can settle in and be a part of the community.
Take me down that road from being a part of congregations to finding your place in the academy. You said earlier that you moved to Drew Theological. Take me down that road and that transition.
Well, before I get there, when I began, even before I enter the ordination process, I began to make myself available to participate in the life of not only the local church but eventually the conference. And once I enter ordained ministry, I became as a theological educator. Unlike a lot of theological educators, I decided that the life of the church and the life of the life of the local church, as well as the life of the annual conference, was something that I am willing to devote my time and energy. I started serving and chairing committees. Committee on Christian unity and interreligious relations. I chaired a committee on race and religion, and make myself available as a resource to the Board of Ordained Ministry. So I was very active in the life of the conference, and it was out of that I got ordained in 2002. In 2003, I was elected as a delegate to General Conference. My first General Conference was 2004. And it came out the only way I can attribute that was to my active involvement in the life of the conference.
Yeah.
And I've been to every single General Conference except in 2012. Was it 2012 or 20? No, except in 2008.
Okay.
When, because of my administrative role at PSR, that I declined nomination.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I have been at every general and jurisdictional conference.
Wow.
So even Now, moving on to Drew.
I love it.
Moving on to Drew was a call to lead a United Methodist institution. But I never sever my ties with my annual conference and continue to make myself available to the annual conference, would fly back to do anything the annual conference reach out to me to work with them with. So that for me is part of extension ministry that I truly cherish as part of the United Methodist tradition.
What do you see as the impact? And I'm moving ahead, that we'll come back, obviously, but what have you seen as the impact of being in the academy on your personal ministry?
In terms of my own personal ministry, I saw myself as a bridge between the church and the academy. And I have always been pushing for a closer relationship between the church and the academy. And this is where Bishop Talbot was very significant in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Because he appreciated the life of higher education and the academy, higher education, theological education, and willing to support someone like myself to leave me in higher education and theological education all my life. It is that kind of appreciation. Unfortunately, Derek, that is not always the case.
Yeah.
I have heard from colleagues over and over again that as they were trying to get through the ordination process with the intention of continuing to serve God and to serve the church in higher education and theological education, their call is questioned.
Mm-hmm.
Their desire to continue in higher education and theological education is questioned as to why they even want to seek ordination. As if the only way that God calls people is to put them in the local church.
Yeah.
And I have heard horror stories, Derek.
Mm-hmm.
And it pains me every time I hear those stories, because they do not have a bishop or a board of ordained ministry that see the importance of serving God and the church in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So bridging the gap between church and academy has always been a deep commitment of mine. And as a result of that, I have served GBHEM.
Mm-hmm.
I have served the University Senate. And in all those roles, I'm always reminding the academy and the church that we need to continue to find a way to bridge the gap. And because the wider the gap is, the wider the gap is, it reduces our it complicates and reduces the impact of our mission in the church.
So keep taking me on that journey. You're at Drew, and then you head over to Pacific School of Religion.
No, I went from Pacific School of Religion to Drew.
Okay.
And then from Drew, I came to Claremont School of Theology to serve as its president.
Wow. And how I think you're still kind of coming down off of that time as president of Claremont. Any reflections on that space that you were, which is, I would imagine, a different space than teaching and directly nurturing students. The role of president, I imagine, is a different role. Any reflections from that time for you?
Well, in all my years, particularly in the last 12, 13 years in administration, in theological education, I have been involved in the conversations about the crisis in our United Methodist Church, because the crisis in the church, the splintering that is happening, 20% of our local churches disaffiliating, all that has an impact on theological education, on our preparation of leadership for the church. So, but we have always been at the forefront of addressing issues that divide us. Theological education has always, for example, when in the 60s, theological education was addressing racism. Theological education was addressing sexism when we were dealing with women in ordained ministry. And so it should not surprise anybody that a lot of us in theological education, from our grounding in biblical interpretation and our grounding in theological thinking, we have been at the forefront of this. And many of us have been at the forefront of advocating for the church to change.
Yeah. And
I saw myself in that role when I was when I was a delegate in 2016 and 2019. I spoke at plenary at General Conference. I took the church to task. I confronted the church with our homophobia. And that is a role that I think theological education seminaries can continue to play, because the kind of work that we do will continue to be grounded not only in saying things that is comfortable or uncomfortable, but grounded in deep theological and biblical work. And that is how we want to continue to train generations of our students, that they do not just narrowly think about the issues and get caught up with one side or another. And Derek, let me tell you my own experience of how I move in terms of dealing with human sexuality. As I say to you, I came from a very conservative evangelical background. And when I was in Atlanta and started attending a United Methodist Church through the invitation of another graduate PhD student at that time, I had been part of those that were condemning queer people because of the biblical text, the so-called but those texts.
Yeah.
But my own journey to rethink all that I was thinking and saying came out of my deep work in biblical interpretation. When, as a biblical scholar, I am confronted with the reality that I cannot ignore the context out of which those biblical texts were teaching. Well, those biblical texts were saying, I had to rethink all that I had thought before. It is not so much that I know a lot of LGBTQIA plus people at that time, because my circle had continued at that time to be within the evangelical people in the denomination. It was out of my own deep biblical theological work. And it was out of that I decided that I could no longer participate in that kind of a local congregation. And went to a Presbyterian church.
Yeah.
Because it was open and affirming. A church that had grappled with the issues. And a pastor that had spoken very strongly against the stance of that denomination too. This was in the 1980s. So it's not because I got to know a lot of gay friends. No, that came after. My own thinking has shifted. So people need to do serious theological work, biblical theological work themselves.
Jeffrey, I believe that the special session General Conference in 2019, where the traditional plan passed, was a significant moment in the life of our church. And I think most people would agree with me. And in this podcast in particular, I've invited my guests to reflect on the personal impact of that session, but maybe even the impact beyond individuals to the greater connection. And so I'm curious as to your response to the passage of the traditional plan. You were in the room when it happened, but I'd also love to hear an academic perspective of maybe what was happening in the room in 2019 and how you thought about it from an institutional perspective.
Derek, in a way, 2019 was a big blow, a big defeat. But from my perspective, it was not ultimately that's surprising about how deeply entrenched people's thinking are.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, at every general conference that I have been part of, we have been fighting this. We've been fighting about the direction of the church. We have been fighting about how human sexuality has impacted the church. I remember in 2004, my very first general conference, and when those paragraphs that we have been trying to get removed was defeated again, I went back and told my colleagues that the progressives need to decide whether or not they can remain in the denomination. And because in 2004, the moderates were aligned with the traditionalists.
Right. Yeah.
People like Adam Hamilton and others, they have not changed their thinking yet. So the center was aligned with the right. So the left, the progressives, was definitely in a minority. We are talking about the U.S.
Right. Right.
And when I went back from the general conference at annual conference, this is what I say to my annual conference, that it's probably time for us to leave. And I remember vividly that I used the metaphor that I do not want to do ministry with one hand tied behind my back. That is literally what the church, the general conference, is doing to us. But over the next few general conferences, we began to see the shift in the U.S. church of the moderates, the center, opening up and begin to grapple with the issue of human sexuality. When we get to 2019, there was a glimmer of hope that the one church plan have a chance to pass. We were all hoping for that.
Yeah.
And when that went down, not by a huge margin.
Right.
When that went down, it impacted all of us to see that there is no desire on the part of the traditionalists to give us some space to do the kind of ministry that we need to do. And in fact, made it even harder for LGBTQIA folks to be ordained, and to make it more challenging on the part of the progressives to affirm the life and ministry of LGBTQIA folks. That for me was the bigger blow with the traditional plan. without the traditional plan, at least we can argue that there may be some wiggle room in there. But the traditional plan made it all worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I remember that at the conference, that was when I called out as an academician. I had to call out the hypocrisy of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Because their interpretation of biblical texts was a pick and choose on how they want to interpret certain texts.
Right.
And to grant contextuality to one issue, but not to other issues.
Mm-hmm.
The issue that I pointed out was divorce. I was very specific that Jesus never affirmed divorce. But the church has moved on from there because we were willing to grapple with societal changes. But the conservatives had also moved on with divorce. There are so many of conservatives, evangelicals that have been involved in two, three marriages.
Yeah.
As if marriage and divorce has nothing to do with sexuality, and only same gender people are having to deal with sexuality. Jesus never separate those issues in terms of marriage and divorce. And so I had, as an academician, to call out the hypocrisy. And we are never consistent with how we use text. And we are still using text for our convenience. Another example, Derek. We are very much, quote unquote, a peace church, even though we do not identify as ourselves like other traditions.
Mm-hmm.
But we have strong social principles on war.
Mm-hmm.
And where do we ground those notions? We ground those notions in thinking in how the society and the world has evolved.
Mm-hmm.
Do we ground that in the Bible necessarily? War is part of the biblical world. God is a warrior. God advocate the destruction of enemies.
Definitely in the Old Testament, for sure.
Absolutely, in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Revelation.
Yeah.
The cosmic war is a war where God is going to destroy all the enemies.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we ground our theology of war and peace? We are using the biblical text selectively, even on this issue.
Yeah.
And so, unless we are willing to bring some consistency on how we deal with human present-day issues and how we use the biblical text, people will continue to call out our hypocrisy as Christians.
Jeffrey, let me ask you this then. We've experienced in the last couple of years disaffiliations, a lot more in my neck of the woods than I think on your side of the U.S. portion of the UMC. And you just made a statement even about divorce, and I couldn't help but draw an interesting parallel of how disaffiliations feel to a lot of people as a kind of divorce, though definitely not the same. What are your feelings about this season of disaffiliations? Do you think this is it better this way, or should we have just hammered out another way to stay together? What do you think about the disaffiliations we're going through right now?
When it comes to a point that one side of the connection decided that they do not want to be with the rest of the connection, and human sexuality is used as a wedge issue.
Agreed.
Ultimately, it's not about human sexuality. And it is about whether or not we are willing to grant one another space for theological thinking and for faith practices. As a progressive, I'm willing to grant the traditionalists their space to worship the God in Jesus Christ in the way that is meaningful for them. But if they insist that I can only be a United Methodist, be a Christian in the way that they define, then they are not willing to respect how I relate to God. That is the dividing line. And if they are not willing, then what they will end up doing is to continue to attack and try to destroy the other. And that will not be healthy. So the disaffiliation, as painful as it is and will be, I think it will allow the rest of us to recalibrate, refocus on what our mission needs to be. Allow us to be more authentic in our faith and theological thinking. And there will come a point in time where some of these congregations may end up returning. The Episcopal Church went through this much earlier than us. Have you read lately?
Oh, I have.
You have read lately that some of these congregations are coming back.
Coming back, yeah.
Those that were part of the North American Anglican Church are coming back to the Episcopal Church. Because as the congregation grow, they see that they can no longer align with the theological perspectives, the narrow theological perspectives.
Yeah.
So 20 years from now, we may be seeing some of these shifts. And the good thing is that in other parts of the world, there is some disaffiliation in Europe. But there has been few disaffiliation in the continent of Africa where our denomination is growing.
Right. As we've seen so far.
As we have seen so far. And even those bishops that were advocating for disaffiliation, some of those bishops are no longer even talking about it. In the Philippines, there have been some disaffiliations. but not entire annual conference. So there have been no single annual conference in the Philippines that have processed disaffiliation like what we see in I believe it was in Bulgaria. So, and I don't think we will be seeing the kind of a huge disaffiliation in Africa. We may lose a percentage, but the percentage is not going to be huge.
Yeah.
And you have relationships with friends and colleagues in the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
I've been to Africa on a good number of occasions. The symbol of United Methodism, the cross and the flame, is a very powerful, significant symbol for Methodists there.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of them to think that they have to give up their identity symbolized by the cross and flame, it's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Jeffrey, and I'm wondering, you may not be able to, in no way do I want you to speak for all, but I'll use this as an example. It's interesting, as we see it now, there aren't a lot of African American congregations that are disaffiliating, which isn't to say that African American congregations feel completely, supported by the United Methodist Church. We have still a lot of anti-racism work to do. There's a good amount of historical disenfranchisement that needs to be dealt with, right? So African American congregations staying is not to say that they are happy. It's just that they're not leaving.
Right.
Do you sense a similar attitude or perspective from our Asian American Pacific Islander congregations, particularly here in the U.S.?
In many ways, those are there are a lot of parallels there, and our ethnic Pacific Islander and Asian churches that are staying does not mean that they are progressive churches. What it has meant to them is that the United Methodists can continue to be a home for them to live out their faith. And among I have heard very few Pacific Islander churches leaving. Very, very few. There may be some clergy that may choose to disaffiliate, but in California, in my annual conference, Cal, Nevada, not a single Pacific Islander church has disaffiliated. And similarly, in Southern California, I haven't heard of any. There are a few Chinese churches that are disaffiliating, and but those are the number is not going to be huge either.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of any Japanese American church disaffiliating. The bigger number are Korean churches.
Right.
And in part because there are more Korean churches than any of the ethnic groups now. In in California Pacific Conference, there are a few congregations that have voted to disaffiliate. And so, but there have not been any congregations so far that have been able to pay their part to take their property with them. So there will be some membership reduction in among the Korean American churches.
Yeah.
Whether or not all these congregations are going to be part of the GMC is something that is yet I'm still waiting to see. And but by and large, the the churches among the Asian American communities are going to remain within the denomination. Nonetheless, as you have put it, Derek, the question is, how do we move forward?
Yeah.
And remember, we need to acknowledge that within our denomination here in the U.S., white congregations are not growing. Ethnic congregations are the ones that are growing.
Yeah.
So when we talk about membership decline, we need to be more nuanced in terms of what we are talking about.
Yeah.
And so once we get through all this affiliation, as we begin to refocus on mission, how our denomination here in the U.S. begin to work with ethnic churches, African American, Hispanic, Asian American, Pacific Islander churches, so on and so forth. How we work to support ethnic churches is going to be a test of who we say we are going to be. If we use the rhetoric of being a decolonial church, our denomination need to put the resources in those places. Put the money where their mouth is. And to strengthen the ethnic churches, help them to continue to grow. That for me is the future of our denomination here in the United States. We have other issues that we need to work with in terms of how we recalibrate when regionalization is passed, and how we work with how we work as a worldwide church. That is going to be important. The future. This coming General Conference can only be the beginning. But we will have a lot of work to do to live out what it means then to be a worldwide church after all the disaffiliation has happened.
Yeah. Jeffrey, we will finally have General Conference 2020 in April and May of 2024. A lot on the table.
Absolutely.
What do you think that space needs to be about?
We cannot pretend that it's going to be easy. There will be disruptive forces. And this affiliation is only part of it. But there will still be forces within the denomination that will try to disrupt and try to hold back the rest of us from moving forward. I have seen their rhetoric. And we cannot afford, all of us from any of our regions cannot pretend that with the disaffiliation already happening, we will have a different general conference. To a certain extent, perhaps, but to a greater extent, I hope that we are not so naive to go into this general conference thinking that, for example, regionalization will pass easily. There are forces who are going to disrupt that to stop us from passing regionalization, which will be the anchor of our denomination in its next manifestation. And so I want all of us to be ready, to be in conversation with one another, to be in deep prayer and discernment together as we go into the general conference. We need to come together to determine what kind of church. Those of us who have decided that there is still something within our denomination that we can be a part of to move forward.
So strong. Do you have hope for the United Methodist Church, Jeffrey?
As I said to you back in 2004, I was ready to pack my bag.
Yeah.
But over the last almost 20 years now, I have begun to see where we have moved. And it has given me hope that we can be the kind of church that we say we want to be. There is hope there, but it's going to take all of us to decide that we are going to be respectful of one another. Acknowledge our theological differences. Acknowledge that out of our theological differences, each of us will have our mission to fulfill the mission of the church in different ways that God has called us to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world cannot be reduced to only one way of doing.
Ooh, yeah.
To make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world comes out of acknowledging our different contexts and live out our Christian discipleship in such a way that has authenticity, that has integrity, so that we can make disciples of every shape and form, of every ethnic group, every theological stripe, so that together we can continue to transform the world.
Amen.
That is what we need to focus on. Not thinking that because that there is there's only one specific way of making disciples. That in some ways, if we think that, then we are reducing God to a very narrow perspective. We are narrowing God to such a small divine reality that can only be meaningful for one group of people, one perspective.
Yeah. Jeffrey, I just feel like I've just been given just an incredible amount of wisdom from sitting and listening to you. I'm so grateful. And I too, I'm with you. I do have hope for the United Methodist Church. Not because I think that it's going to be easy, But I think that the more we do this, listening to each other and learning from each other, listening for the godly wisdom that is sitting within the stories and the journeys and the interpretations that come from all of us at the table, I think that we have the ability to really be a very specific witness for Jesus in this world, a witness that the world is waiting for.
Derek, for me, it is about giving ourselves an opportunity to live out the kind of church that we have the potential to be. How many denominations has a commission on race and religion? How many denominations have a commission on women?
The status and role of women.
Status and role of women. The work ahead of us is how do we live even more fully into those commitments that we have made.
Yeah.
And it needs to be global.
Amen. Jeffrey Kuan, thank you so much for sharing today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Derek. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
It's awesome.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. Bar of the Conference is produced by the team at Wesley's Revival, a ministry of Studio Wesley. Subscribe to this show on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or Google platforms so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.